Chapter 1. A Visitor from the Stars. Ethan Cross lived by a singular philosophy. The less you had to deal with people, the simpler your life would be. After years in the galactic core, fighting battles for causes that blurred the lines between justice and greed, he'd had enough. Trading the chaotic stars for the serene isolation of Juno Prime, he had spent the last 7 years alone. His days were predictable and peaceful, filled with gardening, hunting, and repairing his weather-worn cabin nestled deep in the forest. The planet itself was remote and untouched by major colonization efforts. Its dense forests, pristine rivers, and calm skies were a stark contrast to the industrial sprawl Ethan had left behind. Here, there were no political agendas, no wars, and no expectations. Just him and the quiet hum of nature. But Juno Prime's tranquility was shattered one fateful morning. A crash in the sky. The sound was unlike anything Ethan had heard in years. A deep, resonant hum shook the forest, sending flocks of birds into the sky. Ethan looked up just in time to see a fiery streak cutting through the atmosphere. A ship. The sleek craft wobbled, its engine sputtering, before crashing into the forest about a mile from his cabin. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, gripping the axe he'd been using to split firewood. His heart raced not from fear, but from an instinct long dormant. Crashes on remote planets were rare, and they rarely brought anything good. It could be scavengers, pirates, or worse. Whoever or whatever was in that ship, they weren't likely to leave him in peace. Sighing, Ethan grabbed his rifle from inside the cabin. His weapon was old but reliable, much like himself. He packed a small survival kit and set off toward the crash site, weaving through the dense underbrush with practiced ease. The wreckage. The scene was both mesmerizing and ominous. The ship, now embedded in the soft ground, was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Its smooth, metallic surface shimmered in the dappled sunlight, etched with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse faintly. Smoke poured from its engines, and the acrid smell of scorched metal hung heavy in the air. Cautiously, Ethan approached, his rifle at the ready. As he neared the ship, the hatch hissed open with a soft pneumatic whine. Ethan took a step back, his finger hovering over the trigger. From the shadows of the interior, a figure emerged. She was stunning in a way that defied description, tall and regal, with a presence that seemed to command the air around her. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, shimmering like liquid starlight. Her violet eyes, luminous and intelligent, locked onto Ethan with a mixture of relief and desperation. Her skin, faintly iridescent, bore scratches and bruises that only enhanced her ethereal beauty. "Please," she said, her voice melodic yet strained. "I need your help." The Princess of Valera. Ethan blinked, lowering his rifle slightly. "Who are you?" "I am Princess Lyra of Valera Prime," she said, clutching the side of the ship for support. Her voice wavered, and Ethan could see she was barely holding herself upright. "My ship was attacked. I managed to escape, but my pursuers will not stop until I am captured or killed." Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. Valera Prime. He'd heard of it, a once thriving civilization on the edge of the galaxy, known for its advancements in bioengineering and its enigmatic royal family. But rumors also swirled about political upheaval, rebellions, and a mysterious coup that had left the planet in chaos. "And you decided to crash on my planet?" Ethan asked, his tone skeptical. Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "I had no choice. My ship was failing. Your planet was the closest habitable location. She swayed on her feet, her eyes fluttering shut. Ethan cursed under his breath and lunged forward just in time to catch her as she collapsed. She was surprisingly light, her body trembling with exhaustion. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed, a royal guest." Unwelcome hospitality. Carrying Lyra back to his cabin was no easy feat. The terrain was rugged, and she remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. By the time Ethan reached his cabin, sweat dripped from his brow, and his arms ached. He laid her gently on the cot in his small bedroom, noting the faint glow that seemed to emanate from her skin. As he checked her over, he noticed a small device clipped to her belt. It emitted a faint, rhythmic beep. Curious, he picked it up and examined it. The device was clearly advanced, its surface smooth and seamless, with no visible buttons or seams. Careful, Lyra murmured, her eyes fluttering open. It's a tracker. Ethan frowned, setting the device down on the table. A tracker? You're leading them right to us? Lyra tried to sit up, wincing in pain. It's encoded to me. It transmits a false signal to throw them off. For a while. For a while. Ethan echoed. How long is a while? Hours. Maybe a day, she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. I didn't mean to endanger you, but if they find me. Her voice trailed off, her eyes haunted. Ethan rubbed his temples. Why are they after you? Lyra hesitated, then said, because I am the last surviving member of the Valeran royal family. My people are gone, my planet is in ruins, and my enemies want to ensure I can never reclaim the throne. Ethan leaned against the wall, digesting her words. And you expect me to help you fight off whoever's coming? Lyra met his gaze, her violet eyes filled with a quiet determination. No, I only ask for shelter until I can repair my ship. Once I leave, they will no longer be your problem. Ethan snorted. You think it's that simple? If they're as relentless as you say, they won't just leave. They'll search every inch of this planet until they find you and anyone who helped you. Lyra looked away, guilt flashing across her face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He'd chosen this isolated life to avoid exactly this kind of situation. But now, with an injured alien princess in his cabin and enemies on the way, he had no choice but to act. All right, he said finally. If you want to stay alive, you'll have to trust me. We'll deal with your pursuers, but when this is over, you're leaving. Lyra nodded, her expression solemn. Thank you, Ethan. A storm on the horizon. As night fell, Ethan prepared his cabin for the inevitable confrontation. He secured the perimeter with makeshift traps, checked his rifle, and rationed his supplies. Lyra, despite her injuries, insisted on helping, using her knowledge of advanced technology to enhance his defenses. By the time they finished, the forest was cloaked in darkness, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Do you think they'll come tonight? Lyra asked quietly, standing beside him on the porch. Maybe, Ethan replied, scanning the treeline. If they picked up your signal, they'll be here soon. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, her regal demeanor faltering for a moment. I never wanted this. To run. To hide. I just wanted to protect my people. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. You're doing what you have to. That's all anyone can do. She looked at him, her violet eyes shimmering with gratitude. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. Ethan nodded, turning his attention back to the forest. Let's just hope I don't regret it. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the sound of distant engines rumbled through the air. Ethan gripped his rifle, his jaw tightening. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2. The hunt begins. The sun had barely crested the treetops of Juno Prime when the distant rumble of engines grew louder, vibrating through the dense forest. Ethan crouched by the window of his cabin, rifle in hand, scanning the perimeter for movement. The faint hum of approaching ships sent a chill down his spine. Whoever was coming, they weren't here for a friendly chat. Behind him, Princess Lyra of Valera Prime stood by the door, her silver hair tucked into a hood and her luminous violet eyes scanning the room nervously. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small device that glowed faintly with data streams. Despite her regal bearing, her exhaustion and fear were evident. They're here, Ethan muttered, his voice low and steady. Lyra moved closer, her voice barely above a whisper. How many? 2 ships, maybe 3, Ethan replied, peering through the scope of his rifle. Could be bounty hunters. Could be worse. Lyra's face paled. If they found me, they won't stop until I'm captured or dead. Ethan turned to her, his expression grim. Then we make sure they don't get what they came for. The first wave. The bounty hunters descended from the treetops like shadows, their sleek black armor blending seamlessly with the forest. They moved in coordinated silence, their advanced scanning equipment sweeping the area for any sign of Lyra. Ethan had spent years preparing for intrusions like this, though he'd hoped he'd never have to use those preparations. He'd fortified his cabin with makeshift traps and hidden escape routes, but he knew the odds were against them. "They'll surround us first," Ethan said, keeping his voice calm. "Try to flush us out." Lyra stood beside him, gripping a small plasma pistol he'd handed her earlier. "I'm not afraid to fight." Ethan glanced at her, impressed by her resolve despite her obvious fear. "Just stay close. Let me handle this." The first trap triggered with a sharp crack, a tripwire detonating an explosion of shrapnel that sent 2 bounty hunters sprawling. The others scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks. Ethan fired from the window, picking off a third hunter with a precise shot. "That'll slow them down," he muttered. Lyra watched him, her chest tightening. "You've done this before." "Too many times," Ethan replied, his tone curt. "This is just another day in the life." Reinforcements arrive. The bounty hunters regrouped quickly, their movements efficient and calculated. A low-pitched hum filled the air as one of their ships hovered overhead, deploying a squadron of drones to sweep the area. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, retreating from the window. "They've got aerial support." Lyra's brow furrowed as she studied the hovering ship through a crack in the wall. "Their systems are advanced, but I might be able to disrupt them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How?" Lyra held up the glowing device she'd been carrying. "This is a neural interface. If I can access their network, I can disable their drones, maybe even their ship." Ethan frowned. "And what happens if they trace the hack back to us?" Lyra's eyes glimmered with determination. "Then we fight. It's a risk we have to take." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers flying across the device as she connected to the bounty hunter's network. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she concentrated, her breathing shallow. Outside, the drones hovered closer, their scanning beams sweeping the cabin. Ethan fired at one, narrowly missing its sensor array. "Lyra, whatever you're doing, do it faster." "I'm almost there," she said through gritted teeth. The device emitted a high-pitched beep, and the drones suddenly froze mid-air. A moment later, they dropped to the ground like lifeless puppets. Lyra exhaled shakily. "That should give us a few minutes." The confrontation. Ethan knew the bounty hunters wouldn't retreat without a fight. The loss of their drones would force them to attack directly, and they'd bring everything they had. "We can't hold this position forever," Ethan said, reloading his rifle. "We need to move." Lyra nodded, gripping her pistol tightly. "There's a clearing to the east. If we can reach it, we might be able to signal for help." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly are we signaling? You said you were alone." Lyra hesitated, then said, "There's a resistance network, Valerans and sympathizers who are fighting back against the coup. They might be monitoring this sector." Ethan sighed. "A long shot, but better than staying here." As they prepared to leave, the cabin shook violently. The bounty hunter's ship had fired a missile, obliterating the western wall and sending debris flying. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward the escape route he'd built into the floor. "Go now." The two of them crawled through the narrow tunnel as smoke and fire consumed the cabin above. Emerging in the forest, they sprinted toward the clearing, the sound of footsteps and shouting close behind. A desperate gamble. When they reached the clearing, Lyra activated her device again, sending out a distress signal on an encrypted frequency. Ethan stood guard, his rifle aimed at the tree line as the bounty hunters closed in. "We've got maybe a minute before they're on us," he said, his voice tense. "Any chance that signal's working?" Lyra didn't answer, her focus entirely on the device. Ethan cursed under his breath, firing a warning shot as the first hunter emerged from the trees. Just as the bounty hunters closed the distance, a deafening roar filled the air. A second ship appeared overhead, this one sleek and silver, its hull marked with the insignia of the Valeran resistance. "They answered," Lyra said, her voice filled with relief. The resistance ship unleashed a barrage of firepower, scattering the bounty hunters and forcing their ship to retreat. As the remaining hunters fled, a hatch opened, and a figure descended from the resistance ship, a Valeran soldier clad in gleaming armor. "Princess Lyra," the soldier said, bowing deeply, "we've been searching for you." Lyra's eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward. "Thank you. I thought all was lost." An uneasy alliance. Ethan watched the reunion from a distance, his rifle still in hand. The soldier turned to him, his expression wary. "And who is this?" Lyra smiled faintly. "This is Ethan. He saved my life." The soldier regarded Ethan with suspicion. "A human? You trust him?" "I do," Lyra said firmly. "He's proven himself." Ethan sighed, lowering his rifle. "I'm not looking for a fight. I just want my quiet life back." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. "I owe you more than I can ever repay, Ethan. But if you want to stay, I won't stop you." Ethan glanced at the smoldering remains of his cabin, then at the sky where the bounty hunters had fled. He knew his quiet life was over whether he liked it or not. "Looks like I don't have much of a choice," he said. "Wherever you're going, I'm coming with you." Lyra smiled, her violet eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you." As the Resistance ship carried them into the stars, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. His days of isolation were over, and a new chapter of his life had begun. Chapter 3. Into the Resistance. The sleek Valeran Resistance ship glided through the star-speckled void, its interior buzzing with quiet efficiency. Inside, Ethan Cross sat in a dimly lit briefing room, nursing a cup of lukewarm water. Across from him, Princess Lyra, now garbed in clean, regal attire provided by her people, exuded an air of quiet determination. Despite the relief of their escape from Juno Prime, tension lingered in the air. Ethan was no stranger to conflict, but stepping aboard this ship thrust him into a fight he had no plans of joining. And yet, here he was. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and a Valeran soldier stepped in. His armor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his sharp, angular features carried an expression of skepticism. "Princess Lyra," he began, bowing deeply. "Commander Kale is ready to debrief you." Lyra nodded, rising from her seat. "Thank you, Lieutenant." She turned to Ethan, her expression softening. "You should come with me." Ethan shrugged, following her down the corridor. "Not like I've got anywhere else to go." The commander's plan. The command deck was a hive of activity, with Valeran officers monitoring holographic displays and relaying orders. At the center of the room stood Commander Kale, a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence. His piercing eyes locked onto Ethan the moment they entered. "So this is the human who saved you," Kale said, his tone unreadable. Lyra stepped forward. "Ethan Cross is more than that. He risked his life to protect me when no one else would." Kale's gaze remained fixed on Ethan. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Cross. Former Galactic Corps, dishonorably discharged. Living as a recluse on Juno Prime. Why help her?" Ethan crossed his arms, meeting Kale's gaze without flinching. "Didn't plan on it. She showed up, and I don't like seeing people get hunted down. That's it." Kale's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Simple motivations. I respect that." He turned to Lyra, his expression hardening. "Princess, we've received intelligence that the Dominion Alliance has escalated its efforts. They know you survived, and they've placed an even larger bounty on your head." Lyra's jaw tightened. "They fear the return of Valera. They fear what we represent." Kale gestured to a holographic map of the galaxy. "Our spies have confirmed that the Dominion is using an old Valeran facility on the Lax 6 as a staging ground. They've corrupted its systems and turned it into a research lab to perfect their genetic weapons." Ethan frowned. "Genetic weapons?" Lyra's voice trembled with anger. "They're using Valeran DNA to create biological agents, tools of control and destruction. My people's legacy twisted into a weapon." Kale nodded grimly. "If we can infiltrate the facility and retrieve the data, we can expose the Dominion's crimes to the galaxy. But it won't be easy." Training for the mission. The next several days were grueling. Ethan, despite his years of combat experience, had to adapt to the Valeran Resistance's advanced technology and tactics. Lyra, though fiercely determined, lacked the combat training needed for what lay ahead. In a training bay filled with holographic projections and sparring dummies, Ethan guided Lyra through basic maneuvers. "Hold your stance," he said, stepping behind her and adjusting her grip on the plasma pistol. "You're too stiff. Let the recoil work with you, not against you." Lyra huffed, frustration flickering in her violet eyes. "I'm not a soldier." "Good," Ethan said, his tone firm. "Means you're still human or Valeran, I guess. Just keep practicing." As she fired another shot, hitting the center of the target, Lyra turned to Ethan with a small smile. Better? Better, he admitted, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Their camaraderie didn't go unnoticed. From across the training bay, Kale observed them with a calculating gaze. Though he remained wary of Ethan, he couldn't deny the human's influence on Lyra. She seemed stronger, more focused, with Ethan by her side. The Infiltration. The Resistance ship arrived at the Lax 6 under the cover of darkness, its cloaking systems masking their approach. The planet was barren and desolate, its surface scarred by centuries of industrial exploitation. The Dominion's facility stood in stark contrast, a gleaming monolith bristling with defenses. Ethan, Lyra, and a small team of Resistance fighters descended in a stealth shuttle, landing undetected on the outskirts of the facility. The mission was simple in theory. Infiltrate the facility, retrieve the data, and destroy their research. As they approached the perimeter, Ethan took point, his sharp instincts honed from years of battlefield experience. He disabled a nearby security drone with a well-placed shot, motioning for the others to follow. Inside, the facility was a maze of sterile corridors and reinforced security systems. Lyra worked quickly to bypass locked doors, her neural interface glowing as she hacked into the Dominion's network. "We're close," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. "The central lab is just ahead." The Betrayal. As they entered the lab, they found rows of glowing tanks filled with genetic material samples of Valeran DNA manipulated into grotesque forms. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the horrors before her. "This is monstrous," she said, her voice shaking. "They're turning my people's essence into weapons." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll shut it down. All of it." Kale, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "No, we won't." Ethan turned sharply. "What the hell are you talking about?" Kale's expression darkened. "The Resistance needs leverage against the Dominion. With these weapons, we could turn the tide of the war." Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious. These weapons are an abomination." Kale's gaze hardened. "War isn't one with ideals, princess. It's one with power." Ethan stepped between Kale and Lyra, his rifle aimed at the commander. "If you think I'm letting you walk out of here with this stuff, you've got another thing coming." Tension crackled in the air as the Resistance fighters hesitated, torn between loyalty to their commander and the princess. Finally, one of them stepped forward, aiming their weapon at Kale. "I stand with the princess," she said firmly. "This isn't what we're fighting for." One by one, the others followed suit, leaving Kale outnumbered. He scowled but lowered his weapon. "You're making a mistake." "No," Lyra said, her voice steady. "You are." Escape and renewal. With Kale restrained, the team destroyed the lab, ensuring the Dominion's research couldn't be salvaged. As alarms blared, they fought their way back to the shuttle, narrowly escaping before reinforcements arrived. Aboard the Resistance ship, Lyra addressed the crew, her voice carrying the weight of her newfound resolve. "We will not stoop to their level. Valera's legacy is one of hope and unity, not destruction. Together, we will fight for a future worth saving." Ethan watched her with quiet admiration. For the first time, he saw not just a princess, but a leader. "You did good," he said as she joined him in the observation deck. Lyra smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the stars stretched before them, Ethan realized his quiet life was gone for good. But maybe, just maybe, he'd found something better. Chapter 4. The Last Stand. The Valeran Resistance ship cruised through the dark expanse of space, its crew somber but resolute. After the betrayal on the Lax 6, the lines had been drawn. The remnants of the Resistance were fully behind Princess Lyra, their commitment to her vision of hope and unity unwavering. But there was no time for celebration. The data recovered from the Dominion lab revealed something far more sinister than they had anticipated. They're planning a full-scale assault. Delta, the ship's AI, reported to the command deck. The Dominion's fleet is gathering at Kidara Station, a central hub in their network. They aim to deploy the Valeran genetic weapon on every contested planet. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Ethan Cross leaned against the console, his sharp eyes scanning the holographic map. He'd fought in wars before, but nothing like this. "We have to stop them," Lyra said, her voice firm. If that weapon is deployed, millions will die. Commander Kale, now a prisoner in the brig, had confirmed the Dominion's plan before being detained. The Resistance had little time and fewer resources, but they couldn't afford to wait. Ethan turned to Lyra. What's the play? The plan. The Resistance's only hope was to strike before the Dominion could launch their fleet. Kadara Station was a fortress, heavily defended by warships, automated turrets, and elite Dominion soldiers. A direct assault would be suicide. We can't win this with brute force, Lyra said, pacing the room. We need to hit their command center and disable the fleet's control systems. If we take out their ability to coordinate, their entire operation will crumble. Ethan nodded. We'll need a diversion to draw their forces away from the station. Once we're inside, we plant explosives in the command core and get out before they know what hit them. A young Resistance officer raised a concern. Even if we succeed, how do we escape? Their fleet will still outnumber us. Lyra hesitated, then looked at Ethan. That's why we need to ensure their weapons can't be salvaged. If necessary, we destroy Kadara Station entirely. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's a one-way mission. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. Then it's a mission we have to take. The infiltration. The Resistance ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kadara system, cloaked to avoid detection. Smaller scout ships and fighter squads deployed, engaging the Dominion fleet in a feigned attack to draw their forces away from the station. As chaos unfolded in the void, Lyra, Ethan, and a small strike team approached the station in a stolen Dominion shuttle. Disguised as a maintenance crew, they docked without incident and slipped into the labyrinthine corridors. The station was vast and imposing, its metallic walls humming with energy. Dominion soldiers patrolled the halls, but the strike team moved with practiced precision, avoiding detection as they made their way to the command core. ETA to the core is 5 minutes, Delta reported through their comms. But I'm detecting heightened security near your target. They're onto something. Ethan gritted his teeth. We need to move faster. The command core. The command core was a massive, spherical chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays. At its center, a pulsating energy field protected the station's control systems. The team set to work, planting explosives around the room while Lyra accessed the mainframe. I'm in, she said, her fingers flying across the interface. I'm disabling their fleet's command network. They'll be blind. As she worked, Dominion reinforcements stormed the chamber. The strike team held the line, exchanging fire in a fierce battle. Ethan fought with the precision of a seasoned soldier, taking down enemy after enemy, but the Dominion's numbers were overwhelming. We're running out of time, he shouted. Lyra completed her task and turned to Ethan. The fleet is disabled, but we need to detonate the charges manually. Ethan cursed under his breath. Of course we do. The sacrifice. The team retreated toward the shuttle, but the Dominion forces closed in, cutting off their escape route. Lyra stopped abruptly, her expression grim. I'll stay, she said. I can detonate the charges remotely, but someone has to ensure they go off. Ethan spun to face her. No, absolutely not. Lyra stepped closer, her violet eyes filled with resolve. This is my fight, Ethan. My people are gone because of the Dominion. If I can stop them, I have to. Ethan grabbed her shoulders. You're not doing this alone. She smiled faintly, her hand brushing his cheek. You've already done more for me than I could have ever asked. Now it's my turn. Before he could argue further, Lyra kissed him a fleeting, bittersweet moment. Then, with a burst of energy, she pushed him toward the team and sealed the door behind him. Lyra! Ethan pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Through the glass, she met his gaze one last time. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. The explosion. The strike team barely made it back to the shuttle as the charges detonated. A chain reaction tore through Kadara Station, engulfing it in a brilliant explosion that lit up the void. The shockwave rippled through the Dominion fleet, leaving them in disarray. On board the Resistance ship, the crew watched in stunned silence as the station was obliterated. Ethan stood by the viewport, his fists clenched and his heart heavy. She did it, a Resistance officer said softly. She saved us. Ethan didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the debris field. Lyra's sacrifice had turned the tide of the war, but the cost was almost too much to bear. A legacy of hope. Weeks later, the resistance began to rebuild, rallying new allies with the momentum gained from their victory. The Dominion, weakened and exposed, retreated to their core territories, their grip on the galaxy slipping. Ethan, now a reluctant hero, carried Lyra's memory with him. He returned to Juno Prime, rebuilding his cabin and planting a small garden in her honor. The solitude was bittersweet, but it was where he felt closest to her. One evening, as the stars sparkled overhead, a faint signal crackled through his old comms unit. Delta's voice followed, tinged with surprise. "Ethan, you're not going to believe this. We've picked up a Valeran life signature." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" "It's faint," Delta said, "but it's real, and it's moving toward Juno Prime."